Will ultra-Orthodox Jews in Israel serve in its military? The government is under growing pressure to end their decades-long exemption. That's as calls are growing for all groups to join the army as the war rages on in Gaza. But could it lead to the collapse of Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm James Bays. It's a controversial issue that's been brewing in Israel for years. Should ultra-Orthodox Jews serve in the military? For generations, the community has been exempt, but a court order could change that. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has filed a last-minute application to the Supreme Court for it to be deferred for 30 days. But the controversy isn't going anywhere. Israel's war on Gaza is fueling a sense of urgency and anger among those required to sign up. So how much of a threat does this pose to Prime Minister Netanyahu and his coalition? And would his government survive the fallout from such a change in policy? We'll explore all these issues with our panel of guests in a moment. But first, this report from Katia Lopez-Hodayan.
Ultra-Orthodox Jews have always been exempt from Israel's mandatory military service. That is set to change, but not without a fight. Those protesting say as religious Jews, joining the army contradicts their traditions and lifestyle.
We prefer dying, we prefer filling the jails. To the army we're not going, full stop.
Along with military exemptions, the ultra-Orthodox also receive a government subsidy if they study the Torah full-time in religious institutions. Israel's Supreme Court has ordered the government to stop payments for those who defy the draft. It comes amid growing resentment among those called to enlist.
We want the ultra-Orthodox in the army now. No delays, no politics, and no tricks.
The issue is a challenge for Benjamin Netanyahu that could wreck his coalition. He built an alliance with right-wing groups to secure his term as prime minister, and overseeing an end to the military exemption could be seen as political betrayal.
I am sure we can get this agreement with a majority in the Knesset, but also one thing is clear to me. It's impossible to obtain a total consensus.
It's been a controversial issue for years, but the war in Gaza has turned it into an urgent one. Military leaders say they need more people to enlist and more people on the ground in Gaza. Some ministers say they're ready to resign if the exemption continues.
This nation cannot accept it and it should not be approved. My colleagues and I will not be members of the emergency government if such legislation passes and if it enters the law books of Israel.
The issue is controversial and could mark a significant shift in Israeli society, one that could extend well beyond Israel's war on Gaza. Katia Lopez-Hodayan, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
So what's the significance of all this for the Israeli people and the war on Gaza and beyond? A question for today's panel. In West Jerusalem, Efraim Inbar, the president of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security that aims to advise Israel's leaders in defence and diplomatic matters. In London, Yossi Mekelberg is the associate fellow at Chatham House, specialising in the politics of Israel and the Middle East. And in Tel Aviv, Meron Rapoport is the editor of Local Call, a Hebrew-language news site advancing citizen journalism and an independent media. Thank you, all of you, for joining us. I'd like to get to the ultra-Orthodox first, but there are lots of countries around the world that don't have what some call the draft. So let's get to the basic system first, if I can. To you, Efraim, just explain what the basic rule is for Israelis. As I understand it, with some exceptions, everyone at the age of 18 must serve.
You are correct. The law is that everybody is to be enlisted. There are exceptions. There are two main exceptions. One is the Arab Israelis. We prefer not to put them in a difficult position to fight their cousins, literally their cousins sometimes, and also the ultra-Orthodox that for historic reasons do not serve. Initially, when the state was established, there was a political agreement between David Ben-Gurion and the leadership of the ultra-Orthodox to allow them to lend their legitimacy to the new established state. And the agreement was to allow a few hundred, 400, I believe, boys in yeshiva, in schools of higher Jewish learning, to be exempt from service. This is how it started. During the Begin,
let me bring in Meron on this, because before we go to the specific area of the ultra-Orthodox, just explain it to me a little bit more. If you're 18 years old and, for example, you object to the current conflict that's taking place in Gaza on political grounds, if, for example, you believe that Israel is not doing enough to get aid in, as the International Court of Justice says, or if you believe there should be a ceasefire now, as the UN Security Council says, is there an exemption for you there if you have political disagreements with the war that Israel's involved in?
No, essentially no. You could be exempt on a congenital reasons, but that is very, very difficult to obtain. There's, all kind of gray arrangement in which, young people who do not want to serve find, all kind of health problems in order not to serve. But if you say that you don't want to serve because you disagree with the policies of the government or the occupation or you name it, you go to prison.
OK, Yossi, let's now turn to the specific subject area here, which is the ultra-Orthodox community. Let's first work out exactly who these people are. If you could give us a little bit of a history lesson. I mean, these are the Jewish communities that wear traditional clothing, embrace tradition, oppose modern values and practices. Just explain to me who these communities are and where they came to Israel from.
Well, many of the ultra-Orthodox came from East Europe, though nowadays you have ultra-Orthodox, Sephardi ultra-Orthodox, politically speaking. They have two parties in the Knesset, Shas and Agudat Israel. And I think it's worth reminding our audience and our viewers that many of them actually oppose the Zionist idea. They also said this is preempting the Messiah, so the idea of establishing a state went against their creed. And they saw the Zionist movement as a secular one. Many of them were socialists or liberals, and they opposed it. So the phenomenon of them moving, many of them, you have ultra-Orthodox that actually lived for hundreds of years in what's known as Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, but many of them arrived after 1945 and after the Holocaust. And their tendency to begin was to stay out of politics, but realized that by staying out of politics, there is a heavy price in terms of being close to power and what power comes with. Now, one of the things that Efraim mentioned earlier, at the early days of the country, the first Prime Minister exempt around 400 of them from serving in the military, in the IDF. And I think there are two pillars to this exemption. One is I think some of the more secular have soft spot towards those who dedicate their life to study the Jewish theology. And I think also there is, which become more and more important as we come to the topic today, is the need of the more secular parties, whether it's in the past Labour or Likud nowadays, for their support in order to form a coalition without paying certain ideological price when it comes to the issue with the Palestinians.
Efraim, then, if you can bring us up to date. You said earlier you thought that the estimate was about 400 in 1948. How many now, and how politically powerful are this group?
Well, there are several cohorts, age cohorts that were not enlisted. And after a certain age, after all, the army doesn't call you. So we are talking about close to 70,000 youngsters between age of 18 and 24, 25 that could be called into service, but they are exempt. This is quite a large number. The political power of the ultra-Orthodox, as Yossi has mentioned, has increased over time because They are not left or right, but in the middle politically in modern terms, and they basically can join any coalition, and therefore they can maneuver politically much better. As a result of that, they get a lot of the benefits of the states. And recently, in the past maybe 20 years, they have become part of the right-wing bloc, making a coalition with Netanyahu, also in Jerusalem with Olmert, previous prime minister. And this coalition is now, of course, threatened by the issue of enlistment.
Meron, then let's bring it right up to date and why it's become such a huge issue now. Seems to me there are two aspects. One is the conflict in Gaza, and two, there's been a long-running court process that seems to be coming to a head. First, in terms of the war on Gaza, how the fact that this community does not, I believe there are some that have volunteered to fight, but doesn't send soldiers at this time when Israel is at war. How does the rest of the country feel about that?
That has always been a sensitive issue, the fact that such a large community that is growing bigger because the birth rate there is twice or even three times higher than in the rest of the population. So the tension that such a large number of young people do not serve has always been a sensitive issue. Certainly, after the shock of October 7th and the war on Gaza and the fact that Israel lost more than 650 soldiers, that's a whole brigade almost, that were killed. 3,000 were wounded soldiers. So the army really needs, and the prospect is of a prolonged war in Gaza and maybe in Lebanon, and we don't know where else. So the army really needs more soldiers. They're talking about that they need at least more 7,000 soldiers, new soldiers, in the draft, in the regular draft, and that's something that puts more pressure on the ultra-Orthodox, on this tension between the secular side of Israel and the ultra-Orthodox. It has to be added, as Efraim said, that in the last, I would say, 15 years, the ultra-Orthodox have become a major, almost founding part of Netanyahu's coalition, of right-wing coalition, right-wing bloc. And therefore, going against Netanyahu when the secular, what is called now the liberal camp in Israel, is going against Netanyahu, is also aiming at the ultra-Orthodox, because this is the weakest, I would say, part of the chain of the right-wing bloc, because they are not liked by the seculars. They are not really liked by even the religious, the national religious. The settlers, they're not liked by them because the settlers go to the army and the ultra-Orthodox don't. They're not Zionists, as Yossi mentioned, or not declared Zionists. So there are a lot of tension. They are the weakest part of the right-wing bloc, and therefore, when the liberal camp attack, they are also an easier target.
As I said, there's, Yossi, been a long-running court proceedings going on here, very long-running. Just to bring us up to speed of where we are now, because that has come to a head as well at this time when Israel is at war.
Yes, because there are many issues beyond actually the military service. First, I think the fact that they have a voting pattern, the ultra-Orthodox, that tells you almost, you know, in advance of any election how many members of Knesset they are going to, how many seats they are going to gain, and they can become kingsmakers. With this also come that they want ideologically to impose more and more religious laws and moving towards more halachic state, which upsets the more liberal-minded. Then on top of it, what upsets many of the secular, those who serve in the army, those who are not going to the army, the ultra-Orthodox at the age of 18, they actually are paid by the government. So their rabbinical seminars that were mentioned earlier are basically sponsored by those who later, first serve in the army, then are going to work in something that's in jobs that generate wealth in the society and pay for those that are, A, don't serve in the army, B, study in these rabbinical seminars topics and issues, mainly it's Jewish jurisprudence and scholarly, that's not going to generate wealth. What now the High Court of Justice says that if they don't serve in the army, then also that this money from the public purse shouldn't be paid to these rabbinical seminars. It's an attempt actually to create some equality within the burden that you have in every society, who actually those who carry the burden, whether it's in this case military service, creating a prosperous economy, and who are the one that actually, if you look at the statistics in Israel, the ultra-Orthodox pay 1/9 when it comes to taxes to what the secular one, or at least the secular and those who are not ultra-Orthodox, religious that are not ultra-Orthodox. And that's what the kind of the appeals to the High Court of Justice and the decision by the High Court of Justice is trying to rectify.
Efraim, this current headache for Prime Minister Netanyahu, as we heard, comes from the justice system. Of course, the backdrop from this over the last year is that the Prime Minister was having a battle about changing that system.
Well, I think this is something that happens in many countries over the division of power between the parliament and the Supreme Court of Justice. We see it in the United States, in many other democratic countries. I personally favor, limiting the power of the Supreme Court of Justice that imposes its values on the rest of the society. Such decisions should be made by the parliament. This is my objection. But I think the issue is different. I think the secular population is frightened by the fertility rate of the ultra-Orthodox. And if this demographic trend continues, and I'm not sure it will continue because it can be somehow managed, it will make the secularists an even smaller minority. The Israeli society is not dichotomic. It has ultra-Orthodox, national religious, which are modern Orthodox people, and a large part of traditional Jews, and the secularists are actually a minority. They have been, the founding element of the Israeli state, and they become a minority. And it's a struggle for power. And of course, it annoys not only the secularists, what is happening with service, with the military service, with the ultra-Orthodox. So in this respect, they can find allies among other elements of the population in order to bring a change in the habits of the ultra-Orthodox, maybe forcing them to some extent into modernizing and becoming part of a modern economy, and thereby changing somewhat their views and limiting their political influence.
Yossi, if I can ask you to take a look inside Prime Minister Netanyahu's coalition and just explain to us how divided the cabinet is on this and how much of a problem it is for the Prime Minister, who in the past, in building cabinets, has been described by some as a bit of a political Houdini. How's he going to get out of this one?
Well, it's a tough one, because if he is losing the ultra-Orthodox, if they are leaving the coalition, he has no coalition, because it will be followed also most probably by people like Benny Gantz and Eisenkot, that joined only because of the war, and they are due to leave the coalition. And for the ultra-Orthodox, this is one of the major issues. One of the sources of the support in them is because they, the one that put pressure on any coalition, on any government and prime minister to exempt them from military service. There are a lot of circles there to square. And I think it's the question here if they can legislate, because only through legislation they can change the decision by the High Court of Justice in a way that is, then that's why it's so important to resist what Netanyahu called the reforms, because whether it's reasonable. And most people in Israel think that exempting the ultra-Orthodox is unreasonable, but there are ways to resolve it. It doesn't mean that tomorrow all the ultra-Orthodox, which at the age of military service, should be mobilized into the army. There are ways to resolve it. So some of them that want to join the army be mobilized by reducing the financial support of rabbinical seminar, maybe taxation of those that don't serve, and incentivize those who want to serve in the army. But this needs really a national discussion around this issue, because it divides the country.
Meron, picking up on that point, I mean, if they were forced to serve, all these ultra-Orthodox, how exactly would that work? Would they be willing soldiers? Would they serve in frontline combat units? Would they work cohesively in the military? What's your view on that?
I think this is very far away, although theoretically from tomorrow, the law is abolished, the law that allows them not to serve is abolished, and they should serve, and the funding from the government should stop to the yeshivas, to the rabbinical seminars should stop tomorrow. I think the chances that this will happen are very slim. They may refuse to serve, and if we are talking about tens of thousands, I think it will be impossible for the army to lock up thousands and thousands of yeshiva bochers. It will not happen. The army is completely unprepared to get them. You have to understand that they come also with very limited education, general education. They don't know English, for example. They don't know mathematics. It will be extremely difficult to enlist them. You will have to change the army in order to give them the opportunity for kosher meals and kosher training, even, meaning that they will not train with women. So it's very, very complicated. I think the issue still now is more political. I think Netanyahu is in a very weak point. I think that the tension within his own camp, I'm not talking even in the general public, within his own camp are growing to allow for all these ultra-Orthodox not to serve is not accepted, as I said, by the settlers, for example.
OK, let me bring Efraim in on that point. I mean, how difficult a moment is this for Prime Minister Netanyahu? Not just this issue, but there's the failure to free the captives still being held by Hamas. There's growing tensions between the US and Israel, particularly over the planned Rafah offensive. You've got a UN Security Council resolution, 2 sets of International Court of Justice provisional measures, making Israel, some would say, getting more of a pariah status. How difficult is this now for the Prime Minister?
Obviously, Netanyahu is in a very difficult position because of domestic problems and international pressure. Winning the war will change something, and this means defying to some extent the United States, although we share the same goal of defeating Hamas with the United States as well as many Arab countries. And he will try to find a compromise on the ultra-Orthodox enlistment, because if this issue becomes central in the next election, it will be political suicide. Actually, I warned him personally about it.
Yossi, if we just look at this, if Netanyahu was to fall over this, I mean, in the middle of Israel still involved in a conflict in Gaza, what then happens? I assume you have new elections and then he stays on as the caretaker prime minister, doesn't he? And that, it takes a long time, from my experience, to organise elections in Israel. He could still be prime minister for quite a long time, even if he was toppled.
Well, if we believe public opinion polls, and they are quite, continuously consistent, that the public wants Netanyahu out, and not surprisingly so. So what Israel needs is election. Many people that supported the Netanyahu and Likud party in the last election say outright that they don't want to see Netanyahu anymore as prime minister, not even Likud in power. They are looking for something else. At the end of the day, what we see in Israel, domestic and internationally, the mess that Israel is right now in, the name of Netanyahu is all over it. Whether forming the most right-wing and incompetent government in the country's history, not being prepared for October 7, the assault of the judicial, on the independence of the judiciary, what we see now with the Ultra-Orthodox, that's all because Netanyahu is facing corruption trial. He's trying to stay indefinitely as prime minister in order also to stay possibly out of jail. And Israel can move forward only if and when Netanyahu is out.
Yossi, thank you very much, and thanks to all our guests today, Efraim Inbar, Yossi Mekelberg and Meron Rapoport, and thanks to you for watching. If perhaps you didn't catch the whole programme, you can always watch this and any of our other shows anytime on our website, aljazeera.com. We'd like to hear your thoughts on this subject too. Go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or you can find us on X. We're at AJ Inside Story. From all the team here in Doha, please stay safe. I'll see you back here very soon. Bye-bye for now.